And here we go. Today we are painting a 40K Orc Gorkanaut. Actually the Morkanaut version, but the paint is the same. And already primed it with some all-clad gray primer. And now I'm airbrushing a undercoat of Vallejo Air colors, hull red and armor brown. And just trying to fill in all the nooks and crannies to cover up all the gray. So there's brown going to be in all the recesses in case I miss any areas with yellow. I initially painted it with some Tamiya paints, but it came out really chalky and I didn't like it. So that's why the previous brown is there, so you can just ignore that. To start building up the yellow color, I began with Vallejo Model Color Ochre Brown, and I picked that one because I wanted an orangey brown shade color for the yellow. But surprisingly, when I put it through the airbrush, it came out much more yellow. I was going to try a different color, however, I really liked the look, and it covered the brown extremely well. It just was surprisingly a much different tone than what I was expecting. But anyway, sprayed it all over. If I left a little brown here and there, that's okay. That's the reason for the brown undercoat, is to fill in any nooks and crannies that I may miss with the yellow. But for this coat, I'm trying to cover everything I possibly can. I am trying to avoid the internal areas of the Gorkanaut though, because that's going to be repainted anyway. The next color is Vallejo Game Color Gold Yellow, and as you can see, it's not that much different in tone to the previous Ochre Brown. However, what it is a lot brighter. The Ochre Brown had a good matte tone to it, but I did want something a bit brighter, more standard 40K bright colors to it. This is going over virtually, I'm trying to leave some of the Ochre Brown in the recesses, but this is going over majority of the model. I'd say about 80%. Again, trying to avoid the internal areas since they're going to be painted brown anyway. Now working on our third layer of yellow, this time Vallejo Game Color Sun Yellow, and this is definitely more a traditional yellow color. The previous two did have a bit of orange in them, but this is more pure yellow, moving closer to white. And now I'm starting to work closer towards the edges of the model, not spraying over everything, leaving some of that previous golden yellow in the recesses and concentrating more towards the edges, but still hitting the larger surface areas. For our final layer, I mixed up a mixture of Game Color Sun Yellow mixed with about 50% white, and turned the air pressure on the compressor all the way down to about 10 psi. And this is going just on the edges, so we get a nice crisp highlight edge on various areas of the model. I should point out that the colors I've been using, the yellows, do have a little do not airbrush notation on them. It does not mean that you cannot airbrush them. What it means is that they're a bit more toxic than the other game colors, and so you shouldn't put it into the air where you can breathe it. So even though I do have a airbrush booth, I still use a mask when airbrushing these colors. So just be very cautious. You can use them, but you want to be cautious of your health, or if you're concerned, just don't use them at all. Back to the desk now and ready to do some brush painting. And usually I like to start on the largest surface areas that need painting first and then work my way down to smaller areas. So after doing all the yellow, what comes next is doing all the steel work, because there's going to be a lot of it on this model because I don't want everything to be yellow. I need to break it up because this thing is just a big yellow box otherwise. So starting off with my Vallejo Air colors, again, they do make great metallics, so this is Vallejo Air Steel mixed with black, and the black helps to tone it down a bit and also to cover a lot better. Once that is dry, you can switch to just straight steel and start applying the highlights. In the case of the giant claw here, I did have to do that in a few steps, adding more steel to the previous mixtures, and then I did a little bit of wet blending to blend it in, just because the claw is such a larger surface area. On small areas you can get away with quick 1-2 highlight, but the bigger the area, the more care you have to put into it. Once that was done, I moved on. It does need a wash, but we're going to do that at a later step. Also, there is no need to point out to me that I put the bottom of the claw on wrong. I do realize that. Took me a while to realize it, but I did notice it finally, and I did fix it before the project was finished. Now we need to freehand some flames, and this is easier than you might think. All you need is black paint. You do need to thin it out so it flows easily from the brush, and all you have to do is just draw a squiggle. Do not stop in between. Make it one solid movement from the top to the bottom. Don't worry about making it look like a flame yet. Once you have that line, then you can go back over it and start flushing it out. Follow the line again, use a little bit more pressure from your brush, or go along the outsides of the flame and just fill it out, and you can slightly change the direction, fill out different areas. If you want it larger in a certain area, if you messed up, there are easy ways to fix it if you do screw up. But it is very easy, and after you do it a few times, by the time you get to the other side of the door, in this case, you'll be an expert at painting flames. I decided to give my flames a little bit of color by highlighting them. I could have left them straight black, but that makes them appear a bit flat. So I'm just going back over the flames, or more actually just on the bottom, the larger, fatter areas of the flames, with some Vallejo Model Color Dark Prussian Blue. I then proceeded to add a few more highlights by mixing in some Vallejo Game Color Steel Gray into the Dark Prussian Blue, and I think I added about 2 or 3, working closer towards the bottom of the flames. And want you to remember that I'm using blue here because I'm going to reference it later in the video. All the scratches on the model, you could just use a general wash over the whole thing to fill them in, but I wanted a cleaner look, so I painted them all in using a mix of Panzer Ace's Dark Rust and Vallejo Model Color Flat Red. And to be honest, this is my second time painting this model. The first time I added a bunch of rust to it using the latex technique I showed you a couple weeks ago. However, it didn't look right because there's already scratches molded onto the kit, and me adding extra scratches to it, it didn't fit because they were 2 different effects essentially, one molded on and one painted on, and just clashed. So just sticking with the molded scratches, and I didn't bother adding any more. Now I'm adding highlights to the scratches, and that contrast that I'm adding really helps to make them pop, like they're deep and really gouged into the surface of the vehicle. And I'm using a mix of sun yellow and white, just like I used on the final highlights for the overall color of the kit, and applying those, trying to keep them on the bottom side of the scratches, not highlighting all around, just highlighting the bottom so it looks like the bottom edge, that's where the sun would catch them. If you highlight all around, it doesn't look as good. Sometimes contrast, if you do too much contrast, basically you lose the contrast, so I just want a little bit here. One area of the kit that I really did not like was the interior. Essentially it's just too hollow. It doesn't make sense for this big vehicle to have a big hollow cavity and no mechanical workings inside, so I wanted to keep it dark and not draw attention to it. So first had to do a little bit of undercoating with Vallejo Panzer Ace's Dark Rust to take care of the overspray of the yellow, and then over that I'm just heavily dry brushing it with my steel and black mix. The big orc head motif on front I am painting red, and first undercoated it with Vallejo Model Color Black Red, and then I added some flat red to that to begin the highlights, and I kind of just half dry brush, half stippled it on because it's a very rough textured surface and I wanted to retain that. So just stipple it with the brush, trying not to fill in all the recesses on the model. I then repeated the exact same process again, using more flat red added to the mix, and again just stippling it on but being a little bit lighter this time to retain the previous color, very lightly dabbing with the brush essentially. And then finally using straight flat red just on the edges of the head to give a nice clean crisp edge to it. Again, very nice contrast, so you can see the edge and it just defines the head very well. I get a lot of requests on how to paint horns, so hopefully this will satisfy. I don't have a set color palette for painting horns. I just pick browns and work up to white. In this case, I started off with Vallejo Game Color Earth. Next, I added Model Color Pale Sand to the Earth and started working my way towards the tips of the horns. And the key here is you got to keep your paint really thin, because this is a I know it's a rounded surface, but it's a very flat surface. There's no texture to it, so any paint lines show up really well. So keep your paint thin and slowly build up the layers. Let one dry and paint another one. Once that was dry, I added more pale sand to the previous mixture and painted on another layer, working my way up towards the tip of the horn. And I want you to notice that as I'm applying the paint, I'm applying it in the direction towards the tip of the horn. I am not painting around the horn like in a circle. I'm using lines, working my way up towards it, working towards the tip. That's a good example of how to use your brush, especially when layering. If I were to go in a circle around the horn, I would end up with a obvious line of where the different colors are used. By going towards the tip here, I don't have an obvious line. I have a broken line, so it visually helps to flow better, and the color change is less obvious. The process is repeated, I don't remember exactly how many times on this project, probably around 5 or so, all the way till we get to straight pale sand that goes just on the tip of the horns. The larger the horns, the more layers and the slower the transition needs to be. On smaller horns, you don't have to use 5 or 6 layers. You can get away with 2 or 3 or 4. Again, it depends on the side of the horn. And again, notice brush, I'm not going around the horns, I'm going up and down to help simulate how the horns grow, how the natural color of the horns would be. Going around, I would end up with a funky circle highlight on them, which would look unrealistic. The other side of the horns does need a bit more color, so I mixed up some Vallejo Model Color Camo Black Brown with my earth color. And this paint is slightly thicker than the highlights used on the other end of the horn. I'm trying to kind of create that streak look that the GW models have. It's not my normal style for painting horns, but since it's the big GW model, I figured what the heck, I'll try it. And again, adding texture to it, again painting towards the tip of the horn or towards the base in this case. But not going around in circles, especially since I'm trying to paint lines in this case. After this was done, I gave the whole thing a very thin wash of black and brown ink to bring it all together and also add a bit of contrast towards the base of the horns where they meet the yellow portions, which at some point will have to be repainted. decided to do some last minute conversion work on the model. The Morkanaut version has this plastic wiring that comes off the gun and goes into the body, which just sucks. It flops around and it didn't look nice. I really hated it. So I decided to make my own, and I just took some various wires that I had and wrapped them up with some wire, and that was it. And just glued that in place and painted it, and now I have a more realistic looking wire set that's also flexible, so I can still move the gun arm around. At this point, I glossed varnished the entire model to prepare for decals and also to prepare for the later washes. And gotta say, I said it a lot already I think, but another thing I really don't like about this kit are the decals. They did not make a new decal sheet for the new release of the Orcs. Instead, this is the same sheet from 14 years ago, and the decals are not even individualized on the sheet, meaning it's just one big decal sheet and you have to carefully cut out all your decals. I ended up not using too many decals because the vehicle has a lot of stuff on it already. So just a few pieces here and there, and that was about it. To shade the interior, which I do not like again, keeping it simple and dark, just using some AK Interactive Track Wash, which putting on with a brush, letting it dry for about a half hour, and then removing with a Q-tip. For the exterior, I did not want to use my AK Interactive washes because I didn't want this vehicle too dirty. Also, they didn't have the right shade that I wanted, so went to something old school, and that is oil washes. It's the exact same oil paint you get in an art store, and I mixed up, this is yellow ochre, raw sienna, and burnt sienna to get a nice orangey brown color. And it's thinned with odorless thinner, and you want to thin it. You don't want a super thin wash. It's a very thick wash. It's somewhere between like buttermilk and ketchup, I'd say. So fairly thick as washes go. And just carefully placing it in the recesses wherever I think needs some shade, and also just hitting all the little rivets on the vehicle, which in the case of this vehicle is a lot. I then let the wash dry for about a half hour, and then just removed it with Q-tips, a whole lot of Q-tips, and you don't have to rub very hard. It comes off very easily because of the gloss coat that we applied, and it really helps all the rivets pop and adds a little bit of extra shade to wherever I need it. I used the same technique to shade all the metal bits, except this is a mixture of black and burnt umber. And again, just put it on, let it dry, wipe it off with a Q-tip or a cloth or something. I also used a little bit of this color on just a few tiny areas on the yellow portions of the vehicle, just to add some slight variation wherever I think it needed it. I left the base off until the very end so it can make it would be easier to paint the underside of the ship. The base is, I have tree bark for rocks, and then I kind of built up some bumps and what have you with spackle, and that has gravel glued over it, some smaller rocks and sand glued over it. And before the spackle was dry, I did press the Gorkanaut into the spackle to give an impression of the feet, where the feet go, so it looks like it's sinking into the ground a bit. Because of the spackle I used on the base, I can't just glue the vehicle onto it because the spackles doesn't make a good bond. So I did glue it down, but then it needs to be pinned into place, so just drilled holes through the base up into the vehicle's feet, and then pinned it, use super glue and pins to pin it into place. I'm not using paper clips though to pin it into place. I'm actually using little tiny nails because the heads actually work very well because they fit flush into the bottom of the base and add a bit extra security. There's more material grabbing on from the bottom. And with that, we're finally done. Took about 2 weeks to paint this model, mainly because of all the little greebles and bits that needed extra detail. Just, it was a lot of work. Don't really like the model that much. Mainly it's the interior I don't like. Just mechanically it doesn't work. It's a hollow shell, essentially. Final thing I want to mention is I did paint some of the wiring blue, and if you remember, I painted the flames blue, or I highlighted them with blue. And when it came to paint the wiring, it made sense to use blue because I already used blue to highlight the black. So I just wanted to point that out because if you don't know what colors to use to highlight, look at the colors you already used on the model, and it can make that decision a lot easier. I already used blue, so it was obvious to use blue on the wiring. So I don't have to figure out what color I want. It's already on the model. But that's it. Long project. Hope everyone enjoyed, and see you next time.